Everyone. We should be live in three, two, yes. OBS says I'm live. Welcome everyone. Yeah, thank you all for being here. So Lil Main, welcome. I did miss you. Good to see you back, Dr. Obvious. Great to see you. Thanks. Always good to have you, Philip. Hola. I was in southern Spain a week ago, except I was on business and I'm with the management, and man, it was intense. So I had literally zero free time. I did no sightseeing whatsoever. I saw a factory, I saw a hotel, and I saw the airport. That's it. Um, yeah, so I would love to visit the south of Spain again. Welcome, Dragon. Good to see you. And Artsy Fartsy Nerdy Woody, welcome. Century Sense, good to see you. There's Volt and Horse, of course. Hypostatic U, great to see you all. Thanks all for being here. A couple of points. Next week, I plan to start with Martin Luther. I've been saying that for about 3 years, and I finally have enough information to work with. However, I did invite someone to speak with me on the topic, and they said something really interesting that um, it may discussing that particular topic may cause friction with relationships that they have with other major YouTubers, and that's an interesting point, and I sympathize because me discussing a lot of what I am discussing is not making me many friends. Let's say that way. Martin Luther is the prime source, is the first Protestant. He's the prime source of the Protestant Reformation. His actions, his guidance created effectively the Protestant religion. And the fact that I am revealing this information, I get told, oh, you hate Protestants. Just as when you discuss Muhammad factually and truthfully, Muslims say, oh, you hate Muslims. No, that is not the case. These are merely facts. These are the unavoidable facts that we can all verify that have been avoided, that have been overlooked because these are uncomfortable. And unfortunately, I think we need to, as adults, address them because these are not pleasant facts in many cases. But the fact that I'm dealing with this means that I am not really necessarily welcome with everyone. So yeah, just keep that in mind. That what I'm doing is upsets people, not necessarily because I'm necessarily combative or aggressive, but simply the fact that the material I'm revealing is undermining and destroying a number of sacred cows. So your thoughts on that would be interesting to see in the chat. Roseanne Rossi, very welcome. Harry Johnson, Tom Gyokai, CMB, great to see you. Um, yeah, so although I do believe that my information is starting to get out there, I believe that some of my information is making its way into mainstream channels, much larger channels than mine, channels 20, 30 times larger than mine. And these things are being discussed, maybe not being credited to me, but some of this information, I believe I am seeing it out there, yeah, under other channels, and they're discussing them and adding information. So this is really interesting to see. You saw recently that I discussed the simple fact of the mysticism, how these people are actually all just mystics. And Tick History, TIK History, put out a fantastic episode last week. I mean, brilliant, where he sort of analyzed how Hegel and others are mystics. And it was fantastic. He also took apart the philosopher Heraclitus that I just discussed. Now, I discussed Heraclitus at length during my Darwin series, and he was an inspiration for Darwin's idea of evolution as a form of genocide. So World War I and World War II were based on Darwin's ideas. They were genocidal, but for them, they were cleansing the earth of the impurities and creating a better race by clearing out the weaker, the lower, the worst of existence, making way for progress, right? Some of these ideas came from Heraclitus. Now, someone left a comment for me about Heraclitus, like, Lloyd, Heraclitus was actually just a misunderstood artist. Heraclitus actually was dealing and grappling with issues that are of monumental importance in the scheme of the world. And also, Heraclitus didn't have these sophisticated philosophical tools that were available to people of our era. And also, you can't really, you need to understand him from his perspective. You need to ground him in nonsense. The man was a whack job. I called Heraclitus an idiot and a whack job the man was an idiot and a whack job. He was irrational, he was confused, he was destructive. I refuse at this point to accept the standard academic narrative on people like this, because we've been, if not directly lied to, we've been misled. We've not been fed all of the information. We've not been given the worst of these people. We're given a very, very carefully curated view of the best that they could possibly extract out of these individuals. But once you look at them, their ideas are laughable. They're a joke. They're an idiot. These people are fools and they are dangerous. That's my honest view. And I get angry because I read these things. And I was watching once Socrates in the City. Maybe you've watched that, maybe you've not. It's a very interesting series of talks by very well-known speakers, and I really enjoy it. But there's one of the hosts of Socrates in the City. I forgot his name just all of a sudden. They were talking about Martin Luther, and he was speaking of Martin Luther's anti-Semitism, which I will discuss very soon. In the next week or so, we're going to be discussing that in depth. And he was saying, well, 20 years before Martin Luther called for the genocide, because Martin Luther wanted the genocide of all Jews. He asked for, he called for, he wrote about, he explicitly stated, we should have killed every Jew. Now, I know lots of Christians actually want that. I know this. I've seen it too often in the comments. Many Christians want the Jews to be murdered. They see nothing wrong with that. Christians. Now, this particular speaker was saying, well, but 20 years before Martin Luther went insane and called for pogroms and genocide and slaughter and destruction, he was actually nice to them. And we need to remember him in that way. It's like, yeah. And Adolf Hitler was a really nice teenager, looked after his mom, gave her back rubs when she was tired. He carried the groceries. He helped her across the street. We really need to remember Hitler for these beautiful, warm, gentle acts. Nonsense. Absolute garbage. We do not remember Adolf Hitler for him being a lovely 12-year-old. Okay? And that's exactly what they're trying to do with Heraclitus, and that's exactly what they're trying to do with Martin Luther. So, yeah, that's about where we are at the moment. So, yeah, I upset people. I understand that. We're just going to have to, I'm going to have to live with that. So, yeah. Okay, let me just get through the comments. Welcome, Francis Bull. Tell these prots to repent. Yes, the Martina Luthera, exactly that. So let me see if I've missed anything. Yeah, the Catholic Church has more than its fair share of Gnostic modern mystics, and that is true. We're going to look at one of them today. Yeah, Christ never said following him in the truth would be easy. Christ said, they hate you. Remember, they hated me first. Yeah, it's the first time I've come across this content, Lloyd. Well, thank you, Neil D. That's really great to see. I know you don't care who gets the credit. Truth is truth. Yeah. Look, James Lindsay has said some great things, and James Lindsay started speaking of Marx as a Satanist after I did it. I mean, is it a coincidence that I spoke about it and then James Lindsay spoke of it? But there's a lot that James Lindsay speaks about that parallels mine, but he also does different things. And then Tick History is taking a different tack. But these are all sort of parallel streams. They all cover similar topics. So, okay, let's dive into today's content. We have 8 pages, and then I'll show you some of the new work I'm on. I may be interrupted. So, yeah, Abraham was a pagan worshiper before God set him straight. Very true. Okay, so we finished on Johann Tauler. Okay, we spoke about the Brethren of the Common Life, and we spoke of Thomas à Kempis and Thomas à Kempis's book, whatever that was called, and the Theologia Germanica, right? The book on mysticism that had a profound impact on Martin Luther. Very briefly, I'm going to let you can come back to this and read it yourself later. I'll just zoom in, and later on you can freeze the screen and just read this. But the Catholic Church speaks of Devotio Moderna, or the modern devotion, the spiritual movement from the 15th century. Right? This is a Catholic view of this from the Magisterium. What they speak of, that there are several negatives associated with Thomas à Kempis, Johann Tauler, and that sort of movement. They speak of that they diminished the idea of sacraments, of liturgy, of practical grounded things. They were all about living in their imaginations, right? These were mystics, right? So they're all about the imagination. And basically additionally, the devotional practices focused on the humanity of Christ and his mysteries. They could lead individuals to neglect the sacraments and the sacrifice of the altar, which are vital sources of grace and spiritual energy. Now, a point to make here: why would certain supposed Christians want Christians to relinquish what had historically for 1600 years been the norm, been the practice? what is in the writings and the practices of the very earliest Christians. Why would they want you to abandon that? Well, think about this. If you're going into war, a spiritual battle, but you're going into war, do you want all of the weapons that you can possibly have, or do you want to leave weapons behind that could save your life? So the question is, why would they want us to go into spiritual battle, ignoring, neglecting, leaving behind spiritual weapons, things that could be critical, vital in the battle? Ask yourself why they were throwing these things away. Are they trying to promote Christianity, or are they trying to undermine Christianity? So they speak of Thomas à Kempis, a prominent figure associated with Devotio Moderna, known for his work, The Imitation of Christ. While his writings may have been influential in promoting piety and devotion, they are criticisms. One negative aspect is the excessive focus that his writings alone could lead individuals to neglect the broader aspects of Catholic spirituality, such as participation in the liturgy and reception of the sacraments, which are essential for spiritual growth and nourishment. If you're a Catholic, this is not an opinion. This is something that Catholics have to abide by. This is the word of the magisterium. So it is important for individuals to balance their devotional practices with active participation in the sacramental life of the Church to ensure a holistic and well-rounded life. Now, do understand the magisterium speaks in very vague terms. They never speak harshly. But this is not a positive discussion. Here's the sources if you want to have a look at these. Okay, I'm going to close this now. I don't need this right now. Right, so we've discussed Johann Tauler. Let's move on to the next page. Right, so now let's speak of the... Thank you for bringing up the Theologica Germanica. You're very welcome. Yeah, Imitation of Christ is the name of the book. Yes. And, okay, let me see if I've missed it. Welcome, Andrew Martin. Good to see you back. Many of you tried to watch the Divine Mercy story this morning. I mentioned above. Okay. So, okay, now let's talk about the Protestant Revolution. And this is important because I'm going to show you some stuff about Martin Luther that I think is going to open your eyes in the next episode, but I will show you some of that today. So, in his work, Judgments on History by Jacob Burckhardt, he characterizes the Reformation as an escape from discipline. That discipline would be the physical disciplines grounded in things like the liturgy we just showed, as well as the sacraments. Right? So, emancipation is the immediate appeal of all revolutions. Emancipation from what? Wanting to move towards what? Freedom in itself does not lead to finding truth. So being a radical, having complete freedom. So for instance, atheists call themselves free thinkers, right? Which means they are free from religious thought, free from religious morals, free from Christian thought. But you must understand that these Reformation Protestants, as well as the mystics that we discussed in the last episode, they were free thinkers too. They were libertarian free thinkers. They were theological free thinkers. They are free thinkers just like the atheists are, in the same sense. They are freeing themselves from the historical church, from historical practices. They are free thinkers in that they are living in their imaginations. They are mystics. They're not bound to earthly things. So, let me see. Okay, so freedom itself does not lead to truth, but rather to the opposite. Unlimited freedom allowed for the proliferation of subjective beliefs and perspectives, leading individuals away from objective truth. Ariel Johnson, thank you very much for joining up to Tier 3. Thank you very much. All right. So the Protestant escape from discipline manifested itself as 1. An escape from the obligation to do good works. The doctrine of salvation by faith alone. 2. An escape from the obligation to obey the church. Wow, Century Sins, thank you very much for that donation. Thank you. So 2. An escape from the obligation to obey the church, because then you just obey your own conscience, because your conscience equals the Holy Spirit, right? This rejection of authority led to the elevation of individual conscience and individual personal subjective interpretation of Scripture as infallible. Welcome, Connor. You can just go back to the beginning, play at like double speed, and you should be good. In essence, it was an escape from all previous church authority. Now, we've discussed a number of heresies. We've looked at all of these modernist heresies that Pius X spoke about. And we've seen all of them were an escape from church authority. All of them were an escape into their imaginations. All of them were an escape into their own conscience. Now, you've got Martin Luther and the Protestants doing exactly the same thing. Above all authority, the Protestant places his own mind, his subjective reasoning, Protestantism rejected the papacy, but not the underlying principle of authority. As Luther stated, in matters of faith, each Christian is for himself, Pope, and Church. I've shown this multiple times before. I will be showing it again in the future. Martin Luther literally wrote this. These are his own words. You as a Christian are your own Pope and your own Church. Personally, we belong to a church, but according to Luther, you are your own church, so you make up your own theology. Everyone gets his own theology. You get a theology, you get a theology, you get a theology, you get a theology, you get a theology. I'm not sure Christianity works like that, but okay, Luther. Now, Protestantism created a countless number of popes that largely destroyed the concept of the church, substituting faith with the reason of each separate personality. Oprah Luther, exactly. So hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully this is something that makes sense, given the sources, given what I'm discussing. It makes logical sense. So, yeah. So let me see. Hariel says, thanks, Brother Lloyd. It wouldn't work the last time I tried to renew, but thank you. Yeah. Forgot to write a message. This work with Luther is so important. If Christians can get more on the same page, it would be good for the world. Yes. Now, obviously what happens is that Protestants disagree and they fragment, right? But what they do is then they start to have fewer and fewer things that become vitals. They say, well, I believe in Jesus. Okay, guess that makes us Christians, and everything else is a free-for-all, right? That just means that you simply diminish what it means to be a Christian, and also exactly which version of Jesus do you believe in? What take do you have on him? Understand that even that's subjective. So therefore, yeah. So that leads to questions. Now, let's look at some bad Catholics again, right? The noosphere and the collective unconscious, right? Okay, fine. This is Father Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Now, he faced a number of controversies due to his theological views, particularly evolution, and I've discussed evolution at length in detail for hours. It's a complete mess, as we've discussed. So, wow, thank you very much again. That's so very kind of you. Yeah, so heavy hand, thank you very much for that. I'm really grateful. Thank you for your support. Right, so let's talk about him. Now, of course, many people revere him. Many people think he's fantastic. He's amazing. Welcome, Barrington. Good to see you. Right, so evolutionary theology. So he integrated evolutionary theory with theology. Human evolution was supposedly what he called the alpha point. So Jesus was the alpha point, the beginning, right? And we progress to the omega point. In other words, we become absorbed into the mind of Christ. Christ is both points, the alpha and the omega. And we sort of started off as little, tadpoles, and we eventually evolve and we become Christ. We merge with Christ. Well, that is pantheism, or that is believing that we are God. That's Gnostic, right? If you merge with God because you are God and you enter into the pleroma, then you're a Gnostic. If you believe that you merge with God because you're the same substance as God, then you're a pantheist. Either way, you're not a Christian. So for him, the God of evolution is identified with the world. So that's maybe it's a pantheistic Gnostic view, since there's no limitations on how you can think. Pantheism. He was accused of promoting pantheistic ideas by blurring the distinction between God and creation in his writings. We've seen this over and over. I've repeated this a number of times, discussing numerous heretics and heresies that did exactly this. So his language resembled these Gnostic/pantheistic theologies. They also happen to resemble the theologies of people like Kant, Hegel, Descartes, Hume. You're going to find that this is very much present. When these atheists of the French Revolution, of the Enlightenment, speak of being rationalists, no, they're pagans. They're pantheists, they're pagans, they're Gnostics, they're anything but atheists. Right. So, relationship with church authority. Teilhard de Chardin's work faced scrutiny from the church authorities, led to restrictions on the publication of his writings during his lifetime, and the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, you would know them as the Inquisition, highlighted the need for critical examination of his theories that deviate from church teachings. He denied original sin. His views on original sin, on Adam and Eve, and other theological concepts were heretical. During the 1920s, he wrote an essay on how the doctrine of original sin could be reconciled with the theory of evolution. So in other words, evolution was a good thing. We were evolving towards perfection. That's the Sufi view as well. So, and now the church acknowledges the autonomy of the sciences. But at least this is from the Catholic Church position, right? But it teaches the need for scientific progress to serve humanity and align with ethical and moral principles. Right, now, let's discuss Teilhard de Chardin. Someone mentioned voluntary possession last week, and that was a really good point, because these people were speaking of submitting to whatever, this mystic view of submitting to the universe or whatnot. And someone mentioned that sounds like voluntary possession. And that's a really good point. I was actually blown away by that. I was like, yes, that makes a serious point. So let's have a look at Teilhard de Chardin and his discussion of what he calls the thing. Teilhard de Chardin, the future prophet of a new Christianity, as he called it, centered on evolution, and evolution is atheistic. Atheism is Darwinism. Darwinism is genocidal. Genocidal, mystic nonsense, right? So he had a pivotal, life-changing, mystical encounter with what he later called the thing. So, describing his encounter in his own writing, in the third person, he wrote, "The thing swooped down. Then suddenly, a breath of scorching air passed his forehead, broke through the barrier of his closed eyelids, and penetrated his soul. The man felt he was ceasing to be merely himself. An irresistible rapture took possession of him, as though all the sap of all living things flowing at one and the same moment into the too narrow confines of his heart was mightily refashioning the enfeebled fibers of his being. He was being squeezed like Mo, yes." And at the same time, the anguish of some superhuman peril oppressed him. A confused feeling that the force which had swept down upon him was equivocal, turbid, the combined essence of good and evil. Now, we spoke at length about this, the combined essence of good and evil. I discussed it in the previous show. We talked about how these mystics would say that God was both good and evil. God was Satan and God in one. In other words, he was both, right? Which is heretical. This is also Manichaean Gnosticism. The idea that God is evil and God does evil, but God is good and God does good. This is not Christian. Yes, yin yang, you've got this concept, but understand, so he felt that this was the God that spoke to him. Turbid means unclear, something that's opaque. You can't quite see it. So now, the voice said to him, "You called me here. Here I am," said the thing. Grown weary of abstractions, of attenuations, of the wordiness of social life, you wanted to pit yourself against reality, entire and untamed. And I was waiting for you in order to be made holy. So, when he wanted to fight against reality, and I've spoken at length that these philosophies are anti-reality philosophies, right? That would make this thing holy. Going against reality gives it sanctification. And now I am established on you for life or for death. He who has once seen me can never forget me. He must either damn himself with me or save me with himself. Bishop Barron wants him canonized. Are you serious? I have listened to Bishop Barron, and Bishop Barron, yeah, let's just say I don't trust a word that man says. I've listened to him. I've heard him discuss Martin Luther. I've heard him discuss other topics, and I wouldn't trust him if he told me what day it was. Okay? I absolutely, sorry, but no. Let's continue. So this guy, what are we to make of this, right? From a Christian point of view, this is demonic. He's seeing a demon. What do we make of this other than that? Right? So this is not good. So in the light of these revelations, it is not surprising to learn that Teilhard held that even evil spiritual powers are the living instruments of Christ. So demons are the instruments of Christ. Now look, in one sense, maybe you can twist that and say, well, yes, but what he's saying is effectively they are good. Understand, the way you mean it and the way they mean it are not the same. So the evil spiritual powers are the living instruments of Christ. In the decades that followed, he opposed every tenet of the traditional Catholic doctrine of creation with a new evolutionary creed. And he even said, Christ is saved by evolution. Hallelujah. Christ has been saved because of Charles Darwin. Yes, there you go. So understand there are a lot of bad Catholics. We've discussed a number of bad Catholics so far. Okay? We've discussed bad Marxists. They're all bad. Anyway, if you're Marxist, you're bad, period. But yeah, so So now, Pope Pius XII wrote an encyclical called Humani Generis concerning false opinions which threaten to undermine the foundation of Catholic doctrine, issued in 1950. It emphasized the Church's teaching authority, rejected the idea that evolution explains all existence. It condemned existentialism and called for theologians to recognize the papacy's role in defining truths of faith. It did not confirm evolution as true, but the Pope allowed for the discussion of evolution. Now, to some degree, evolution is tolerated as potentially viable, certain to a limited degree. And there's no reason to say that certain aspects of evolution, I don't want to get into a big firestorm here, could well be. God could use evolution to a particular point, but evolution is really about how things evolve, not how they were created. The whole, how life arrived, how it was created, there, atheism has no answer. So anyway, moving on. Yeah, I heard one Catholic exorcist called voluntary possession as complete possession. It's a real thing and irreversible. That wouldn't be true, because if you listen to these, if you listen to, I'd say, credible exorcists, they'll tell you that yes, you can come back from this, but it's not always easy. So, okay, Catholic theologians and writers like Hans Kung, Edward Schillebeeckx, and Charles Curran revived modernism. So understand, modernism has been in the Catholic Church for 1,000 years, and it came back and kept coming back. All right. It also made its way very heavily through Protestantism. It definitely infected Protestantism, as we've seen over and over and over again. Right. Adaptation's a fair word, artsy-fartsy. I mean, we see that adaptations do happen, a certain macroevolution, but you see, Darwin took this idea, which seems to be a genuine idea, but he also stretched it into infinity, stretched it beyond recognition into the impractical, but also it was based on Sufi mysticism. Again, it is based on pagan Greek ideas from 2,600 years ago. So again, a lot of the stuff is simply just paganism and Sufism mythology. And so yeah, that's, you know, it's just a way to replace God at the end of the day, right? And where the line is between what's acceptable and what isn't, well, the Catholic Church does have its lines, right? But these people obviously are trying to undermine the church, undermine the Logos, undermine the Bible, etc. The writings attributed to Louisa Picaretta sound a lot like the Chardin, okay? More consistency with diabolic writing. Is Sufism influenced by Plato? 153% yes. Dr. Obvious. Most certainly. So, his writings challenged papal, okay? It's all of these people. They challenged papal and scriptural infallibility. They rejected Catholic moral teachings, and they promoted ideas like women's ordination into the priesthood. Right, they were censured and prohibited from being recognized as Catholic theologians. Now, one of the nice things, at least with having a boss on top called the Pope within the Catholic Church, is the buck stops there. He can go, look, you guys, sorry, but no, you're fired. This does not go. Within the Protestant churches, they're going to turn around and go, well, that's not one of my, he's not in my church. The 12 people in my church, we're not doing that thing. But you're all part of the same church. Well, he's not part of my church. We're the 19th Baptist Church of Cincinnati. He's part of the 23rd Baptist Church of Cincinnati, and so they got nothing to do with us. So in other words, there's nothing they can do. They've got no central control. It's a mess. It's a complete mess. It's rehashed pagan teachings, exactly. So in response, Pope John Paul publishes the Catechism of the Catholic Church in 92, the first church-wide catechism in 4 centuries. There's reason for these things happening. The church typically, and has always done for centuries, things in response to heresies. The very first canon of the Bible was developed in response to heresy. So, he also issued the encyclical Veritatis Splendor in 1993 to rectify errors in Catholic moral teaching. Right? In 94, he definitively rejected the concept of women's ordination through the document Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. Right. So now, let's talk about Charles Curran, and then we'll come back to this discussion we just had. So Charles Curran, one of the people we mentioned on the previous page, right? One of these fools that we mentioned here. He serves at Southern Methodist University now. So he left the Catholic Church. He was thrown out. Now he's at Southern Methodist University as the Elizabeth Scurlock University Professor of Human Values. So in 71, he says that homosexual acts in the context of a committed relationship. We're going to come back to this whole moral sort of story. But if you're in a committed homosexual relationship, that's all good. It fell short of the ideal, but were to be considered good for homosexual people. He stated that, I'd come to accept the moral legitimacy of a union of 2 gay men or lesbians. Hold on, it's not the ideal, but it's morally legitimate. So pick one Okay, pick one. But no, you see, while he's saying one thing on the one side of his mouth, he's saying something else on the other side of his mouth. So in 92, he said that the official hierarchical Roman Catholic teaching should accept the moral value and goodness of same-sex relationships. So it's not ideal, but it's perfectly good, and we really should just bend over and accept it and hope they use Vaseline. Okay, fine and well. Okay, so now I want to briefly come back to something I'd said about 1 Timothy 3, 14 to 15. Right? I hope to come to you soon, but I'm writing these things to you so that if I am delayed, you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of the truth. Notice, he's not saying the Bible, which is the pillar and foundation. He's saying the church, right, which is the pillar and foundation of truth. In other words, the church sets the tone. Right? Now, again, we see in Matthew 18 to 17, if they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church, right? Don't decide, oh, well, let's choose our own opinions from the Bible. But it says here, tell it to the church. If they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. So to the early Catholics, and I've mentioned this before, to the early Christians, the church was the final decision maker. The church was the final moral arbiter. It was the church, not the churches, not the denominations, the church, one church. And if someone didn't listen to the final opinion of the church, they're a pagan or a tax collector. Bear that in mind. Make of that what you will. Okay, now, so the sin of Adam, yeah. So from a church perspective, people who are homosexual should, and I mean, look, there was great success with getting people to walk away from homosexuality. There were treatments that were successful. Obviously, the left fought against those because they want to infect the world with immorality, right? But for the church, from the church perspective, if you're a homosexual, you should then abstain, right? Because it would be sinful. So you abstain and you try to remain morally pure that way. But that's the church perspective. So John Paul II, in his encyclical Veritatis Splendor, addresses errors in Catholic moral teaching that were becoming prevalent. The errors included the systematic questioning of traditional moral doctrine within the Christian community, doubts and objections regarding the Church's moral teachings, and the influence of currents of thought detaching human freedom from its essential relationship to truth. Now, we've just seen the whole corruption of the idea of gay sex, right, with Mr. Curran, right? And we know what the Church's position is, whether that is popular or not. But also the idea of the mystics who were detaching human freedom, free thinkers, we're free mystics, from its essential relationship to truth. Now you have to ask yourself, how does the church define truth? Well, yeah, that's a story I'll discuss maybe at length later. I have notes on that. But the truth from a church perspective is that the story of the Bible, the New Testament, the birth of Jesus, the miracles that happened, the evidence of everything that is recorded there of his life, that is truth. The whole enterprise that tries to undermine the church tries to deny this and call it fiction. Whereas what we're seeing is that they are the fiction, but Christianity is the truth. Jesus, his life, his actions, his miracles, his presence, him being God, that is truth. And everything else stems from that, the logos, right? Everything else is fiction. So they're trying to separate their ideas from this truth. If the miracles were regarded as historical, then God is Jesus and the Bible is true. Whereas if they will dispute it, which they do, which is the only thing they do, then clearly they are disputing the truth and they're trying to impose their fiction as truth. Right. Some authors have suggested that there are two levels of moral truth. They argue that there could be exceptions to acts that are considered inherently evil, based on an individual's conscience. You see, because this feels so right. This feels right that it just feels right. It just feels, yeah, exactly. So this undermines objective moral law because, for instance, stealing is morally wrong. It's an evil act. Love is love. Exactly, Roseanne Rossi. Good point. So, however, AOC was happy to tell us, and during the BLM riots and so on, stealing food to feed a starving family is not evil. It's morally justifiable, right? And the blacks that are stealing their way through LA and New York, that's not theft. That's just reparations for you white people being so evil. You understand that? Now, this also comes from a particular philosophical viewpoint that I will discuss, coming from the Enlightenment, where they rejected objective moral laws, universal, timeless, objective moral laws, in favor of what they called moral character. Right? It's amazing how they use amazing phrases like moral character. It sounds so good until you dig into it and see that it's a pile of burning trash. Right, situational morality, exactly. But there's actually a philosophy behind that, and we have to go to Mr. David Hume to learn more about that. So, the encyclical emphasized the importance of acknowledging and upholding the universality, and immutability, the unchanging nature of moral commandments, particularly those prohibiting intrinsically evil acts, as a response to these errors. So they were talking about Catholics, bad Catholics. So the Pope is writing this in response to bad Catholics, right? Also, I mean, to these ideas in the world, but they're affecting Catholicism. So the church seeks to help the faithful form a moral conscience aligned with the truth, looking to Christ as the ultimate answer to questions of morality and freedom. So yeah, I did mention very early in the beginning, it's like I'm going to be presenting and contrasting Catholic doctrine extensively through this, right? Through the talks that I'm doing, so that everyone can get an idea of this is what the Catholic Church has taught, what they taught then in the first century, what they're teaching now. I'm still looking for the pagan stuff. I haven't found it yet. Maybe someone can help me. So yes, GC, I'm just going to have to call you GC because I cannot say your name. They're using all possible heresies to deviate truth into relativism. And that's a fair point. Yes, you need to go. Dr. Gemmell, thank you for being here. We'll see you a bit later. So now I have 2 more pages, then I am done. Okay, so Emperor Julian the Apostate. Julian, also known as Emperor Julian, known as Julian the Apostate, Roman emperor, attempted to restore traditional Roman religious practices and undermine the influence of Christianity during his reign from 361 to 363 AD. Lived for 2 years. During his short reign, he employed a variety of political and social strategies to undermine the Christian church. This is relevant because we're going to see this played out again and again. We're going to see this played out in the Reformation. We're going to see this played out today. So he wanted to revive traditional Roman religious practices, just as the Reformation and even the Renaissance was a revival of occult practices, revival of pagan practices, revival of Gnostic practices. So he tried to revive the old Roman religion and its practices such as animal sacrifice and the worship of the traditional pantheon of gods. Now, Muslims are still doing animal sacrifice, right? And by doing so, he aimed to weaken the influence of Christianity and restore traditional religious practice of the Roman Empire. He promoted religious tolerance. Well, we need to tolerate Satanism these days because, by the way, remember the guy that knocked down that satanic statue in the government house, I think, in whichever state it was in the States? I mean, I donated to that. I think I put $10 or $20 into that because I kudos to that guy. So yeah, I mean, for his court cases, if you want to throw in a couple of dollars, I mean, the guy earned it. I think he earned it for knocking over that statue of Baphomet. Yeah. So anyway, promoting religious tolerance. He issued an edict of religious tolerance, allowing all religions to be practiced freely within the empire. The whole point of this was he aimed at reducing Christian influence, as it was now no longer the only officially sanctioned religion. Okay? So now, restricting the privilege of Christian clergy. So yeah, that's another thing he did. So he restricted their privileges and reduced their access to resources. This included limiting the amount of land they could own and reducing their tax exemptions. He supported rival religious groups. He supported the Jewish community and the followers of the paganisms. Remember, the traditional Roman religion didn't quite exactly have one. There were just all of these paganisms, and Rome allowed and tolerated, as long as you paid your taxes and didn't fight against the Roman state, you could have whatever religion you liked. So in an effort to create a counterbalance to the growing influence of Christianity, and he used propaganda. So he uses propaganda to undermine the Christian church. He includes writing a series of satirical essays to make fun of Christianity. And he banned Christians from teaching. He issues an edict that banned Christians from teaching in schools and universities. Does that sound familiar? In an effort to limit their influence on the intellectual development of the empire. So now we have to briefly introduce, now the last 2 slides, I'm now setting up for follow-up talks that I'm going to be having. So let's talk about parallels to the Alta Vendita. Yes, Neil D, history does repeat. It certainly repeats. So Let me see if I've missed any comments. The church has always fought paganism within and without. It just now, what's interesting is that you see, I've seen in the comments so often. I've encountered it so often. Oh, the Catholic Church is pagan. I mean, you get liars like, oh man, this man is one of the biggest, fattest liars. And I'm ashamed because he's South African like me. Walter Veith, the man's a liar, outright, flat out liar. Good God. Anyway, they'll claim the Catholic Church is pagan. Now, we've identified paganism. The Church has always fought against, stood against, historically, paganism. So it's odd. And the pagans have stood against Christianity. They were fighting against the Catholic Church, who they regarded as not pagan. So now today they turn around and says, well, the Catholic Church was pagan, and those pagans, yeah, they were pagan too. It's like, that makes no sense. It's like oranges that were fighting apples, and the oranges were saying, oh, you apples are wrong. And then today the bananas come along and go, yeah, those apples are oranges. That's stupid. Okay. So, a document produced by the highest lodge of the Carbonari. Okay. The Alta Vendita. We'll discuss this in the near future. But so the Alta Vendita was a document produced by the highest lodge of the Carbonari, an Italian secret society with links to Freemasonry. Now, you will find sources online. You will find Catholic sources online that will tell you the Carbonari had no connection to the Freemasons. None whatsoever. We've checked. And we as good Catholics, we can tell you, we can assure you, people are telling you conspiracies that the Carbonari are attached to the Freemasons. Oh! Nonsense. Okay? The founders of the Carbonari were Freemasons, but we'll discuss that in the future. Why these Catholics, some of whom claim to be, we are ex-Freemasons, trust us, we know. Why these ex-Freemasons are telling you this, I don't know. Whether I trust them, no, I don't. So, the document known as the Permanent Instruction of the Alta Vendita outlined a plan to infiltrate and subvert the Catholic Church in order to promote liberal and secular ideas. It's a real document. The spaghetti carbonara, not as tasty. Sadly, not as tasty. Doesn't go down as well. So, some parallels between Emperor Julian's actions and the strategies in the Alta Vendita. Revival of traditional religious practices. So, Julian wanted to revive Roman practices. The Alta Vendita aimed to promote liberal and secular ideas within the Catholic Church. Here's some Vaseline, bend over for me. Yeah, maybe not. Political and social strategies. Emperor Julian and the Alta Vendita employed various political and social strategies to undermine their respective targets. So Julian promoted religious tolerance and restricting, be tolerant. Wow, thank you very much. I really appreciate the donation. Thank you again. So that is from, let me see, get the name, Nuvan Volters, by Donkey. Thank you very much. So they promoted tolerance, right? Now, the whole idea of tolerance is to undermine the moral system of the West, and restricting the privileges of Christian clergy. The Alta Vendita proposed infiltrating the Catholic Church and promoting liberal ideas amongst its members, okay? So, long-term goals. Julian and the Alta Vendita had long-term goals, decades-long goals, that would take years, even centuries to achieve. Julian's efforts were cut short because he died after 2 years. The Alta Vendita's plan was intended to be a gradual process that would unfold over decades. Okay, now let's look at restricting the activities of Christians. There are parallels between Julian's actions, some of what the Alta Vendita did, and what we see today. In many countries, there are restrictions on the ability of Christians to practice their faith. You can be praying outside an abortion clinic and be arrested for that, as you know. You can pray on a sports field and lose your job over that, as you know. So you cannot teach your beliefs in school, nor can you have influence in the workplace. You can lose your job, as you are well aware. The rise of secularism. There's been a rise in secularism. I used to lisp as a kid. I still have difficulty sometimes. With a growing number of people identifying as non-religious or atheist, while Christianity is suppressed. So, yes, Islam's long-term goals. And it is like the mafia, yes. The role of the state in religious affairs. In some countries, the state plays a big role in regulating religious affairs, including the appointment of religious leaders and the control of religious institutions. When I get into Protestantism, you're going to see that this is very much true of the whole Protestant foundation. So, yeah, that's exactly the story, okay? That is exactly what they say here. they achieved in the Protestant Reformation. We'll discuss. We've seen the FBI investigate and monitor Catholics as subversives, homegrown terrorists, and extremists. So you guys are wondering why I'm not a Catholic? That's why. I don't want the FBI knocking on my door and arresting me. Thanks. So yeah. And that's okay. So that ends this particular talk. I have part 2. It will be coming. I got cut off live streaming the hardware store. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So okay. So hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully hopefully this has now given you some good perspective on what's been happening, how what we see today goes back 2,000 years and more, how it's been repeated time and time again. You've seen cycles of this occur historically. Every couple of hundred years, bang, there you go. Same thing, right? And then hopefully you've also noticed how very much within the Protestant religious movement, you see the very same things that we see here that are anti-Christian. So these are things we really need to question our history. We need to do thorough research, and we need to ask the right questions. Okay, any more shows on Reasoned Answers? I haven't seen you there lately. Yeah, I upset him because on one of the shows I talked about Martin Luther being an irrational who hated reason, and that upset his audience very, very greatly. And then he brought on David Suarez, seminarian, to discuss, and they failed to discuss anything about Luther. And yeah, so the audience was very, very upset about that. And of course, I wasn't allowed to go on to discuss that with them, but fine. So yeah, I will be discussing Luther in the near future, and I am going to be, dropping bombs, I think, with regards to Mr. Martin Luther. It's time that man was exposed. Have I read Kierkegaard? No, but Kierkegaard was a bad Catholic, if I recall. So yeah. Okay, so now let me... Oh, by the way, this presentation, the first 50 pages are available on my coffee shop. Thank you, Lilo Main, for adding the link to the chat. Yeah, so this last 60 pages, I just finished them today, so I will upload that soon, hopefully tomorrow. Okay, so what have you learned from this? What have you taken away from this? I know that I say very contentious things. I know that I say some things that go against the grain, that really, like everyone tells you bananas are yellow, and then I come along and say, no, bananas are actually purple or blue, or, and I mean, to use a bad analogy, but I know I say things, and hopefully I back them up with facts. But let's continue. Let's go back here. Let me see. I've got a part 2 on Pius X and modernism that I think would be very, very helpful and important to do. But let's have a quick look at Martin Luther. Would you guys like a short few minutes preview on Martin Luther? So I need to talk about Gnosticism and early Christianity. That's going to be really long. Then I've got Pius X, the Oath Against Modernism, right? And let's have a look at Luther. So I've been working on Luther for like 4 years now, right? Yeah, so let's do a few pages. I may be interrupted. I will have to go when that happens, because I'll have to go and open the door. This came up for a bit recently as we found out some prominent Italian bishops had a meeting with Freemasons about reconciling. Yeah, the Catholic Church has taken a hard stand against Freemasonry. It has stated bluntly, it is written, popes have written more encyclicals against Freemasonry than any other topic. And they've stated bluntly, you cannot be a Freemason and a Christian. If you are a Freemason, you cannot be a Catholic. You are excommunicated from the church, right? Yeah, so yeah, there's a reason I put this guy there, but I will be discussing that. I'll be going into depth on the... Yeah, this is Martin Luther. Martin Luther looks hideous. Let's have a look. This is Martin Luther in death. Weighed something like, what, 300 kilos? I don't know how many, 150 kilos, like 330 pounds, right? So he was 330 pounds. And this is Martin Luther's death mask, in case you wanted to know. This was a death mask made of that. Who's his comments on Luther? Let me see. John Calvin. We'll be discussing Calvin a little bit as well. This is Martin Luther's death mask, right? Yeah, that's how he looked on his death. So this is Calvin and Luther in Hell. These are two paintings. One is called Calvin in Hell, another one is called Luther in Hell. And I could not trace this quote. I don't know where this quote comes from, but this is really interesting. It goes with this picture online. The Reformation has brought no gifts. It has led millions of souls to hell. No gifts, unless you call the uncrowning of our Lord Jesus Christ as King over society as a gift. This Reformation created a religion of man and of self, out of which came Illuminism, Freemasonry, sexual libertinism, Marxism, globalism, and some radical secularism. Some gifts, Jorge, some gifts. Luther was a liar and a deceiver, and his work has long ago been, and I don't have the rest of the quote, but I found this really fascinating in conjunction with this picture. Now, the two paintings of Luther and Calvin entering hell are being led to the gates of hell by a multitude of little demons, insects, and imaginary animals, and they are seated on moving carcasses, and they seem to be enjoying their ride as if they finally arrived at home. So they were painted by two father and son painters called Egbert van Heemskerk and the Younger. The name of two painters, father and son, active in England, 17th to 18th century. Right, so I'm not going to go too much into that, but there's obviously these themes. But now I'll skip over some of this. However, Simpson critiques Calvinist theology for its determinist account of salvation, which he describes as cruel, despair-producing, and humanity-belittling, which is really interesting. So we'll have a look at that. Now here's the second picture. This is Calvin going into hell. Okay. Does liberalism have its roots in the liberal upheavals of the English Reformation? So to understand liberalism, we need to understand early modern Calvinism they speak of. Okay. So now they speak of it derives from Protestantism by repudiating it. Early Protestantism, he asserts, was so punishingly violent and unsustainable that it eventually led to its adherents to invent a political doctrine to stabilize cultures after 150 years of psychic and social violence. Okay, so I'm not going to go into length because we will be discussing this in the near future. Now, Time magazine and the Anglican priest Ralph Inger, he was the Archbishop of Canterbury, I believe, or something like that. So now he says, okay, if we want to find a scapegoat on whose shoulders we may lay the miseries which Germany has brought upon the world, I am more and more convinced that the worst evil genius of that country is Martin Luther. Lutheranism is German. It worships a God who is neither just nor merciful. We must hope that the next swing of the pendulum will put an end to Luther's influence in Germany. Now let's continue. I'm just going to touch briefly on these slides. Martin Luther, The Dark Side by Lyndall Roper, who has written more than one biography of Luther, I believe. Very well respected author and historian. Luther had a course. He would write coarse polemical assaults, which were effective MO, enabling him to cement his own position by infringing on the right of others to speak. So he would silence others. It made dialogue, much less compromise with the Catholics, all but impossible. He was highly aggressive. He had a distinctive persona that was coarse, and he used masculine posturing and irreverent defiance of papal authority, and he had an anarchic attractiveness. Okay, keep those points in mind. Let's look at the Journal of Political and Military Sociology. Remember, if the door goes, I'm going to have to rush. And so, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of violence. Now, this is interesting. At noon on October 31, 1517, Martin Luther nailed 95 theses to the main door of the castle church in Wittenberg. In 1520, Niccolo Machiavelli published his book in which he announced the scientific laws of military power and success. In a century, a religious and military revolution swept over Europe, destroying the last vestiges of armed chivalry and the unified Catholic worldview upon which it rested. Without denying other factors, this paper examines three ways in which the Reformation Protestantism influenced the development of modern warfare. By maintaining that the natural world was utterly profane, this thanks to Calvinism, thanks to Martin Luther, thanks to their doctrine of depravity, which is Gnostic, that the world of matter, that the world of humans is evil. Wow, thank you very much for the support. I do appreciate ORATX, thank you. So, Calvin and Luther taught that the world was evil. The world of matter was evil. Only the world of spirit is good. Exactly what the Gnostics taught. Therefore, Protestantism legitimized the pursuit of warfare in a scientific way. In other words, these were violent mystics. They were war-based mystics. The major Protestant generals, Maurice, Adolphus, Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell, were remarkably adept at employing new technology to augment the fighting capacities of their armies. I have said before, the Protestant movement was a political movement. It was a military political movement aimed at conquest. In other words, this is the Protestant jihad. Protestant mysticism. I've discussed this already in the previous talk. Now the idea of Protestant mysticism is well known to historians. It is well known within academic circles, but it's in silos. It is not mainstream because clearly no one wants to talk about it because it would undermine this view of Catholics bad, Protestants walk on water, which is nonsense. Right, so Protestant mysticism was characterized by a divine hatred of the ungodly. Well, you're ungodly. Everyone goes on about, the Catholic Church killed so many witches. Like, they took their Bic lighters and they would burn their toes off. The Catholics were bad. Well, have a look at the Protestants and see if any less witches got burned when the Protestants took over, or if the number of witch burnings went up 5 times under the Protestants. Just have a look. If the Protestants fixed the problems, because no, they did not. Things got worse, much worse. But those are facts and figures and statistics we can look at later. So this resulted in a deadly martial enthusiasm. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. We can get to the source later. You can always read that later. Now, Martin Luther says, war and killing, along with all the things that accompany war and martial law, have been instituted by God. The hand that wields the sword and kills with it is not man's hand, but God's. And it is not man, but God, who hangs, who tortures, who beheads, who kills and fights. Good old Martin Luther. Thanks, Luther. So raise your hand. How many of you believe in and worship a God that beheads, tortures, kills, hangs, and fights? Please let me know. If that's the God that you worship, drop me a 1 in the chat, just so I know. And if this is utter craven madness from Martin Luther, drop a 2, okay? Please drop a 2, so that we know that you agree that Martin Luther is talking absolute poop. So, yeah, so this is Martin Luther, okay? This is the Martin Luther that we are not told about. Let's continue. Scholars recognize that without question, the century from the 1560s was a watershed period in military history. That's the start of the Reformation. Casualties in the 17th century increased more than 100% of what they were in the previous 100 years. During the 30 Years' War, Germany's population was reduced from 2/3 to 1/4 of its original 16 million. So the Protestant Reformation decimated the German population down to maybe 1/4 of its original number. German farmland had been ravaged, the schools closed for lack of teachers, more than half its houses destroyed. Let's continue. We will say little more about these 2 explanations of modern European warfare, except to suggest that by themselves they fail to mention, and so I need to fix my slide here. This slide is over that slide, it needs to be on top. But they say here, the state, the law, and military force that were most directly influenced by Protestantism. The state, the law. Oh, those Catholics were raising armies. The Jesuits were soldiers. They were ninjas, Well, it says here that the Protestants were the military and the police, and the relationship between Protestantism and military violence. These are not the only guys writing this. I've spoken about this before. This is not an unknown issue in academia. It's just unknown to people who like to lie about history, typically called Protestants. So, 3 facts about the late Protestant Reformation Krieg ethic, or war ethic. The military ethics of Lutheranism. Why are they talking about the military ethics of Lutheranism? Does anyone talk about the military ethics of Muhammad? Of course they do, because the man was a warmonger. So was Martin Luther. Was Jesus one? No, not the last I checked. And they said the military ethics of Lutheranism, Calvinism, and Baptism legitimized the pursuit of warfare in a rational and scientific way. We're killing you with science. I hope you feel better. So the Protestant generals adapted new technology for the sake of military victory. So yeah, do you guys see a small problem here? Was this the history that you were given of Martin Luther and the Reformation? We're the good guys. It doesn't look like it, actually. So let me fix this slide. Yeah, let me fix this slide because why? We'll need to bring this to front. Bring to front. Yeah, okay. So, so what they're speaking of here is the popular acceptance of a desacralized military ethic. So, in other words, what they're saying here is that the Catholic Church, what is implied here is that the Catholic Church had a sacralized military ethic, the concept of the just war, the holy war. Whereas under Protestantism, this was just, look, man, we got to kill people. How do we do this? Let's use technology. Are we the baddies? Exactly, artsy fartsy. Are we the baddies? Well, yeah, you are. Just so you know. Okay. Now, this journal goes on to talk about Protestant mysticism and violence. Now, I have discussed Protestant mysticism. We just had to talk about that in the previous episode at length. Now they're saying, well, these Protestant mystics were violent. They're violent mystics. Protestantism in general and the protests of Luther, Munzer, and others, and all the other reformers had their origin in Christian mysticism. And we've discussed the kind of mysticism that they were following. Cuckoo, heretical, Gnostic, pagan, pantheistic, cuckoo mysticism. Not even Calvinism, for all its puritanical legalism, failed to be deeply affected by the mystical spirit. Mystical militarism. Thank you, Neil. That's a really good point. Mystical militarism. Yes, I need to remember that term. By Christian mysticism, we are referring to the direct inward experience of being justified. We need to murder you guys, and we're justified because I can feel. Hold on, God's telling me I need to kill all of you. So you see that's being justified because you can feel it. God, I can feel God who likes to hang things and murder things and chop off heads. He's telling me to go and murder all of those people and take their lands. And Protestantism. And the feeling and experience with all of its fathomless ecstasy. It's an inward experience, and the Reformation had its beginnings in a reaction of charismatic individuals to the rituals of the medieval church, which they considered spiritually stultifying. Hey, we need to get rid of all those catechisms and all of that liturgy stuff and that sacrament nonsense. No. We've got to listen to your feelings. Listen to your heart. You've got to feel it. So, did everything I just said in the previous talk make sense now? Do you see where this is going? These are... I don't want to swear. I'm trying hard not to. These people were violent, deluded, insane heretics, and they founded the Protestant churches. The founders of Protestantism were political revolutionaries and heretics. So yeah, did any of you ever get told this about Protestantism and Martin Luther or John Calvin? Did you ever learn this in school or university? Let me know, please. I'll pause here. I think I've done enough. Have any of you ever learned this about Martin Luther and his people? Yes, these are psychopaths. So yeah, so guys, so the question is, are we the baddies? Yes, Martin, you and Calvin, you are the baddies. You are very much the baddies. Yeah, the Inquisition, you've been lied to about the Inquisition. Protestants got together, they colluded as a political endeavor on a national level, on an international level, and lied to you about the Inquisition. Simple as that. It's simple. I know. It's like 95% of what you've ever been told about the Inquisition is lies. Pretty much. I know I say these outrageous things. I know I say outrageous things. Hopefully I back them up with evidence. Hopefully I will provide loads of evidence, reams of evidence. But yeah, guys, does it sound like I am making it up, or am I saying outrageous things that are based on fact, based on evidence? So yeah, so guys, this is Martin Luther. This is the Luther that we were not told about. So we have been lied to. We have been given a very partial history. So yeah, I mean, look, I put my credibility on the line because I say things that go against mainstream academia, that go against a lot of things. Not because I want to be a conspiracy theorist, because I want to be contrarian, but because I am reading things that say, hold on, we've got one side of the coin here in these academic textbooks, but we have other things that we were not told that change the picture. Thank you, Rosanne Rossi. That is very kind. That's actually a really nice statement. Okay, she says here, this is a really kind statement, actually. Let me just bring that up. you are saying outrageous truths, and that's very kind to know. Yeah. Now she says, hold on, let me just bring that. She says, you are saying outrageous truths. So I hope so. So let me see. The horrific lies about Catholics by Protestants is extremely troubling. Yeah, no, it's a lot of lies. I heard that these were the best Christians of their times. Yeah, supposedly. They claim to be perfect. They claim to be speaking. Martin Luther claimed to be the mouthpiece of God, the mouthpiece of Jesus. He was speaking directly for Jesus. Conociendo el Islam says, we will not learn this from Protestants, but hey, none speaks out this. Even the Catholic Church doesn't say anything like this. We are Latin American, we take almost everything from the USA. So guys, I offend a lot of people. I probably wouldn't be welcome on a lot of channels, not necessarily because I'm not a nice person. I mean, who knows? I might be an idiot, but I say things that are not necessarily welcome. I say things that are upsetting, and I bring facts that are uncomfortable, and things that undermine people's beliefs, things that undermine lies they've been told that have been around for centuries. So, yeah, no one can match your research skills, Lloyd. Thank you for everything you do. Yeah, Lil Domain, thank you. I mean, I've been hinting at things like this for a long time. I've shown different sources, but when you have multiple sources that all attest to the same thing, they all converge on the same point. When you can have paper after paper, I mean, I don't have to read the whole paper, do I? I don't have to show 50 of them. But when you can show, here's a sampling. These are the facts. These are very uncomfortable facts. Roseanne, I'm not calling you a saint, but you quote them. Thanks. Yeah, so I will be contrasting in the near future. We're going to be talking a lot more about Pius X, the stuff, not Pius X as such, right? But the stuff he wrote about, the stuff he was aiming at. One thing I will say is that the Catholic Church has terrible PR. They are very bad at communicating. They write in a jargon that it takes a PhD and a supercomputer to analyze and figure out what the heck are they trying to tell me. They really need to just write in plain English. It would be really, really nice. So GC, that is Spanish, I'm assuming. Please expose the Spanish Inquisition. I have a lot of notes. I have pages and pages and pages on the Spanish Inquisition. I will be talking about it. It is just too much. I'm one person. I do not have a team. I am working alone. I have to research. I have to edit. I have to write. It is just a lot. Okay, I have a lot of information on the Reformation. As I've said, 95% of what you've been told about the Reformation is just lies. It's not even just mistakes. At this point, I'm hard-pressed to think that with this level of error, that it's a mistake. You don't have this many mistakes. It's not humanly possible to make this many mistakes. It's just lies, deliberate lies. Yeah, too few Lloyds. Yeah, too few Lloyds. I wish there were more Lloyds. So guys, that's it from me. I wrap up this part 1 of Pius X, the discussion of heresies, the modernism. We're going to be doing more talks on this topic. So yeah, hopefully I retain my credibility because I'm providing factual evidence. I'm providing a lot of evidence that converges, things that you can refer to and reference, names, books, people, historical situations you can look at. So normally you'd be called a Renaissance man, but a higher compliment to Dark Ages. Yeah, people tell me I should have been born in the Dark Ages because apparently I look terrible in the light. So yeah. I once went to a fortune teller. She said, Lloyd, you're going to be poor and friendless until you're 30. And then I said to her, what happens after I'm 30? And then she said, no, then you'll get used to it. So here's where I am today. Yeah. so yeah, guys, thanks. So that's it from me. Any questions and comments, drop them in the chat. And yeah, hopefully speak about this stuff. Use it, make screen caps, put it out there. Start to challenge the status quo. Start to challenge the lies. These are very difficult truths, but they are truths nonetheless. These are facts, and they change the picture once you add these facts to the mix. Yeah. So guys, Sunday I'll be on with Thunderous One. Okay. So he and I will be having a talk on Sunday. We'll try to do one on Monday. Then next week I'll try and do a couple, and then the week after that I will not be available. I have to take a week off. I will be traveling, and so I'll definitely be unable to do any streaming whatsoever. But once I'm back, I will, from the next week, the weekend will be out, but the next week I'll pick up again. I'll try to do like 2 Sundays from now if I'm available. So yeah, guys, yeah. So thanks all for your time, for your attention. I appreciate all the support. It's been very kind of you. And yeah, guys, have a wonderful day further. God bless, and we'll see you soon.